Greetings, Warlords. Rodge here. Welcome to Saga Thursday, the show all about the skirmish miniatures game from Studio Tomahawk. Joined this time by fan favorite Stephen Holdeman the third. How's it going?
Doing great. Happy to be here again.
Awesome. So you have agreed to come on. This is an emergency faction review session, trying to get it in before Adepticon because Skraelings are going to be legal this year as a faction. So
for the first time since the very initial U.S. Grand Melee, this is the first time Skraelings have been allowed. So
yeah, so I know first edition they had a reputation for being busted or something like that, right? Yeah. So I'll say this, Steve. My first game of Saga ever was a group game, and I was controlling the Skraelings that my buddy had.
What a strange experience.
Yeah, it didn't take that first demo. Didn't take. It'd be another year or two before we got in. So I don't know if it was the Skraelings back then, some bad juju with their mechanics or what. But
well, and I think one of the reasons that no one sees them now, and we're opening the door a little bit, is that originally the first edition Skrælings, as you talked about, were absolutely game-breaking. And I think they had such a drastic impact at their first kind of couple big competitive runs that everyone just said, nope. And as soon as second edition came out, we didn't even really take the time to analyze whether the board was excellent or not. We just said, oh, the Skrælings are back. Let's leave them as an optional side board a little bit. But the reality is, there's a drastic difference in power level, I think, between first and second edition Skrælings. And I'll comment that the first edition Skrælings, for those that don't know, they could remove an ability that was on your battle board, just take it 100% away from you. And back in the day, there were some factions that absolutely relied on a couple key abilities.
Sure,
a good example was the Anglo-Saxons needed to have stout hearts or whatever it was to boost their theoretical size. You just take that away. And then the Strathclyde Welsh, a faction that could deploy half of its units off the table, needed an ability to bring those units onto the table. And the Skrælings remove that ability, and they automatically lose half their army. And so we just said, oh my God. And most of the Saga abilities that the Skrælings could use were your Saga abilities. They would copy abilities on the opponent's board and then multiply them with some of the abilities they had. And there was just some interactions there that you could tell this was like a very fun night in France when they invented these guys the first time, and they probably never spoke of them afterwards. So, these Skrælings, they were a little bit different. So,
yeah, and there's probably a change too, just between first and second, and then with the recent javelin changes, right? Because this is primarily a shooting-ish faction, would you say, or not?
Yeah,
really?
Absolutely. So, this is up until the release of Chivalry, this army was completely unique in the sense that it only has access to warlords, warriors, and levy. And that's only javelin-armed warriors and bow-armed levy. Uniquely, their warlord has no equipment but is armor 4/4. So he starts out as the kind of most underarmed warlord in there. But I was almost going to comment a few things before we go rolling on.
Yeah, absolutely. You've been doing a little research here on your your own. So
again, for folks that don't know, the Skrælings do represent the North American indigenous folks that we famously hear about in the Saga of the Greenlanders, Saga of Eric the Red, and that we know through a lot of archaeological evidence and other stuff like that, had contact with different Scandinavian settlers in North America. So the initial encounters between these were very fractious if we read the Norse accounts of these things.
Yeah.
But it is worth noting that the Skrælings are not a tribe unto themselves, but rather the Skrælings is kind of a catch-all term that nowadays is kind of considered derogatory towards the groups of different kind of Arctic indigenous people that Scandinavians would encounter. There's a lot of argument about what the name exactly means in there, but most of them don't translate into anything too nice. I will say, though, that the Scandinavians, after the Viking Age, after they pulled back from North America because of, again, maybe a lot of rough contact periods, they still trade with the North American indigenous all the way into the 1400s through the Greenland colony. So these are a bunch of different groups. And the initial people the Skrælings would represent are debated a little bit but we think that they are the ancestors of the Inuit people now, or the post-Dorset people. Dorset people are a culture that exists kind of before this age. A lot of people think they're a group called the Thule people, which I think is a very cool name.
Yeah, that's a cool name.
Any fantasy thing or some Conan stuff in there.
Yeah,
you can tell they don't call themselves the Thule people. And that's a hard thing about all indigenous groups when we talk about them, is that we're often going to use, what we call exonyms, names we call them rather than ethnonyms, the names they call themselves. And a lot of times it's not meant to be derogatory, but it's just worth noting that that exists as we go through talking about these. If people want to learn more about them, because again, there's just a lot of really silly misconceptions. And this is kind of a mystique group of people, because we either have the Thule people or some people we call the Beaver, or the Miklik people, which are like an Algonquin speaking group that have come up through Canada. So we either have the Arctic folks, or we have the Algonquin folks that have come really north. We don't know 100% for sure, but if you want to learn more about them, the best place to start is a book called Origin here by a geneticist named Jennifer Raff, and she did the biggest study on indigenous North American genetics. Since this is a pre-Columbian time and a pre-written language time, DNA is going to be one of the coolest ways to try to understand that period. And archaeology, also this recent publication from the American Archaeological Institute then called Out of the Cold, kind of covers a lot of the different archaeological ages of culture that exist, both in the age that Saga covers and then a little bit later. And as we go out to a little bit later, this book, even though it's not exactly the same exact people that maybe the Skrælings represent, the Beothuk people are the people that live in these regions currently, or did at least when Europeans made recontact of these areas in the 1700s. And that book there has a wonderful amount of primary sources, as much as we can, about what these people do in their day-to-day life. They are not quite as the Scandinavians portrayed them there too. But like I said, it is worth noting the Scandinavians had a meaningful trade contact relationship with these people long after this initial thing that you read about. And I think it's the Saga of the Greenlanders, where famously a Skræling is killed who's trying to steal a weapon. And then they come back in mass and attack Thorfinn and I think the other settlers. And they have to try to escape. And the lady there, and I'm sorry that I forget her name, rips off her shirt, exposing her breasts, and cuts herself with a knife, and then screams, running at the Skrælings. And the Skrælings are so freaked out by this that they all run off and give the Vikings a chance to escape. But 150 years ago, we still maybe thought these were just stories. But nowadays, we have a lot of evidence to suggest that these types of contacts really, really did happen. So coming back into Saga world, Skrælings are a little bit different than that. We're only here to talk about fighting and totems and javelins and other things like that. So with the nod towards the respect for their culture that doesn't often get a limelight, because you're not going to go to the store and find 50 books on these people in the same way that you are about the medieval French. So it's worth giving a little toss out to them, because most Saga factions won't really have the chance, I think, so, or have the chance already, I should say. So.
All right, raising the bar for faction reviewers. Everyone's going to have to come in with at least three secondary sources. Yes, like a book report or something. Yeah, high school. That's awesome.
All right, the board itself, though, like I said, strange army list to kick it off. So,
okay, yeah. So I don't think we mentioned, but the where you get this is from the Studio Tomahawk website. Assuming the links are up and working, you can find them there. I'm going to post them to the Saga Thursday Discord in the rules and resources, just so we got another static link. Sometimes the Studio Tomahawk website isn't always working with its links and stuff like that. So you can get the battle board and then a little rules PDF. And I gotta say, it's pretty cool. It's well presented. It's got the same quality as the main books, just in a super condensed form. So, what Saga dice do the Skrælings use, Stephen?
What a good question. They don't have their own Saga dice, so whatever Saga dice that you like, go ahead and roll them. Maybe recommend maybe the Celtic dice. They've got like some snakes and some other stuff. You got the stag on there, some other animals.
The best, but...
totems on here. At home, when I'm rolling them, I roll the Ordenstadt dice because they don't have any other use on any of my other boards. So a lot of times I'm rolling them on this. But so there's a unique absence of Saga dice symbols on there. And instead we see kind of a white square, a gray square, and kind of a black square, and then combinations of all of them. A white square then just represents any Saga dice facing that you want. It just means that ability, you can put any dice there. Mm-hmm. If you see two gray squares, it means that you have to put two of the same dice facing on there. Again, these can be whatever you want. So that could be two uncommons, two rares, two commons. And then finally we have, well, not finally, we have an uncommon, or let me rephrase that. We got a gray one and a black one, which means that you have to put two different facings of dice on there. That covers what normal Saga boards have to deal with all the time, but they have a unique sort of thing here where they have three dice abilities.
Yeah, we'll see a triple decker here, which I'm surprised. I thought we maybe would have seen another board with a triple decker or something at some point, but there's certain balance issues, I'm sure, that
and we can see later on as we go through the basic abilities here that they have the ability to change the facing of some of their dice to what they need them to be. But it's a strange experience playing these guys because you look down sometimes and you see, I got a bunch of rares. And then you realize, wait, that's nothing. That's probably one of the hardest parts of playing this faction in general is you look down and you kind of automatically after your roll assess the value of what your roll is a little bit. I got some commons, uncommons, and rares, and that's how we usually sort it. But in this case, any combination is going to fulfill two different dice facings. So a common and a rare, an uncommon and a rare, a common and an uncommon. These are all three different options to fulfill something on an ability that normally you would have been pigeonholed to only select two dice. And so there can be some kind of weird mentalism sometimes when you're trying to really quickly set board, because these dice facings can be kind of whatever you need them to be at the right time, but you're going to have to pay for that a lot of times too.
Yeah, so sometimes you want ones that are the same, and sometimes you want them looking different, I guess, right? So there isn't necessarily, can't just tell if you had a good roll or exactly what you need at first glance. But we're taking a look at the upper left right now. So if we're just looking at the basic kind of activations where most war bands would have kind of a hero, Hearthguard, warriors, and then levies, we see activate the warriors or heroes on the left for any die there. So that's pretty good.
It is. And I think it's worth noting that, you have the flexibility of your Hearthguard with your warriors a little bit. It's an all warrior faction if you want it to be, but they can still run. Again, the Swiss now are kind of stealing the show with this because they're the same setup, but otherwise you couldn't normally activate a warrior on any dice like that. So they're the most flexible warriors in the game, almost, until the Swiss came out. So
that's cool. And then to the right of that, we see hunters. So activate a unit of levies. So this is two dice. Could be two commons, two uncommons. Could be two rares. But I think below there are different ways to activate the levies. So is that right?
There are, but they cost the very same. So there's no cheaper way other than these two dice pretty much to activate your levy unit unless you're using your Weobay. And so that is one of the harder parts of the board is just how many times you're going to need multiple dice to do something that maybe other boards can get accomplished with one dice. Pretty much.
So that might seem kind of pricey, but if we look at Vinland here, you use two different dice. You can activate two units, but they do have to be within S of each other. So you can just activate two levies units that way if they're hanging out next to each other, right?
Exactly. And I think a lot of boards would be happy to have that as a basic ability up there. So
let's look to the other half of the basic abilities up top.
Then we got combat bonus is the normal on there. Attack dice or defense dice for melee shooting reaction. But then we got ancestral spirits replacing their activation pool. So these guys don't have a way to get extra Saga dice other than something wrapped up with their totems that we'll talk about a little bit later on here. Ancestral Spirits lets you take one of your inactive Saga dice and turn it to show the face of your choice. So in a way, you can always pay an extra 1 dice tax to get the dice that you need at any time.
Yeah.
In a way, that's kind of like the successors. You're paying a dice to get that rare that you want to activate all these abilities, except the successors have got it a lot better in that case. Often you're just, what you're paying for doesn't often translate into tons of attacks and stuff. So.
Got it. All right. So up top, yeah, not too different. Nothing too crazy there. But below, they have 10 advanced abilities, but we're not gonna start at the upper left per se. Upon discussion with our faction review master Steven, we're gonna jump straight to about halfway through the board and to the first of the totem abilities. So there's 5 different totem abilities. Eagle, Beaver is 5 different animals. And it uses this totem mechanic for 5 of these abilities. And so they kind of have 5 traditional abilities and then 5 of these totems. So what's going on? How do we use these totem abilities?
Totems are the most interesting part of the Skraeling board, and it's something unique that they have that no other faction has. Totems are all abilities that are played in your orders phase.
Okay.
And when you play one, the unit that has them permanently benefits from those special abilities until they are dead. Only one unit can have one of the totems at a time. So you can't have 2 different bear totems, or you can't have 2 different eagle totems. There's a small exception to that we'll talk about later. But in general, once you've placed a totem onto a unit, they are with that for the rest of the game, pretty much.
Sure.
And so a lot of these totems, though, have a really, really heavy cost, and there's stuff that you have to get done in your orders phase. And that's one of the hardest parts about playing the Skraelings. And, leading into this, I wanted to take Skraelings into Adepticon or one of these other competitive events. But something I'm intimidated about is the first couple turns with the Skraelings, they really seem to want to sit back and power up their totems, because if you start to lose your Saga dice later on in the game, you're not going to be able to access these totems. And if you do, you're probably going to have a really, really inactive turn because you've had to use all of your dice to power yourself up for this. Because each one of these totems is pretty cool. And I think the hardest part of playing this board is trying to decide, what totems do I really need? What totems would be cool if I have the dice later on? And then do I actually need to access all 5 of these totems? Am I burning a lot of my resources and focus early in the game on something that is making me lose because I haven't even got halfway up the table yet? Or I'm having to not defend myself because my opponent's flying down my throat and all I'm doing is triggering a couple orders to try to prepare myself. It also means these totems are not orders reactions. And so that means if you're the second player, you're not going to have the ability to pop up one of these totems ahead of the game schedule, kind of, in the way that some other armies, maybe the Carolingians, can take and roll some dice and put it on their Pelorium or whatever, and be prepared to do stuff later on. The Thracians really, or not the Thracians, the Skraelings really can't do that in this. So they have a little bit of a problem getting their momentum going. But some of the abilities are pretty dang juicy. And as you initially look at them in a vacuum, you think, wow, I'd kill to have a unit that could have that ability the entire game. But there's not as much zazz to complement it once your totems are on there. The Skraeling board itself is otherwise half totems and half really interesting movement and positional plays. You're not getting some train wreck of a combo, and you're not getting tons of fatigue-free mass activates. There are some fatigue-free plays in here, but as you kind of alluded to, the Skraelings were really designed for Saga 2.0 when it first came out. At that time, whenever you moved, a movement generated a javelin shot. And a lot of the board abilities and the release that Studio Tomahawk has on their website, when you look in the question section,
the verbiage there
about it, he's reminding you that a lot of these moves that this board generates are supposed to give you some sort of offensive output. And in the current iteration of the game, these guys don't have any offensive output just because they had a move. So you have some positional plays, but the tax is still there for it, and you're not getting kind of what these other boards did. Now, I wasn't lucky enough to play these guys in Saga 2.2, which I would say was the last version of javelins, where we have we can double tap the javelins. I think that these Skrælings could have been pretty tough then, because we could have worked ourselves into some neat positions. But as it is right now, we'll talk about it as we get to some of these specific abilities. But I think it will reveal itself that you say, wow, that's not, that would have been good a long time ago, but maybe needs an adjustment to be good now. So, but yeah, kicking them off then, we got the totems.
Right. Well, first one up here, Eagle Totem. So 2 of any dice. While this totem is active, the unit gets a +1 bonus to each of its attack dice during the first shooting attack it makes each turn. So I think just a good example here. You know, if you can get this off on the first turn, you could maybe get 5 or 6 shooting attacks over 5 or 6 turns. You know, so you get in early. You know, try to
a lot of incentive with these to get it in early as much as you can. And what Eagle Totem I think struggles with is we all want a +1 on our shots, especially with not too hard of a condition. You know, it's the first shot of the turn. But all the other totems look a lot better than Eagle. So I find personally, Eagle is one, unless I have a really specific strategy for it. Eagle's maybe the last one I put on, or one that I maybe skip in the early game in favor of the next totem that is on there.
So is that the Puma Totem?
Puma Totem, baby. I think Puma Totem is a very, very interesting one. We have to have a dice of we have to have 2 dice, one of 2 different facings on here. So you could do a common, uncommon, common, rare.
Would be pretty easy, yeah.
What it does is while this totem is active, the unit generates an additional Saga dice no matter how many models it contains.
Ooh, nice.
Also, the models in this unit count as Hearthguard for the purposes of the Bodyguard's special rule. So we have 2 really powerful things right off the bat there, especially when we think about the fact that we'll talk about kind of army list structure later, I think, but it's really hard to decide how to set things up. But no matter what, you're going to have some big units, I think, with your Skrælings. Having a warlord that can draw from 12 bodyguard levy around him suddenly is a way tougher warlord, even though he's an armor 4/4/1. It's also frustrating for your opponent to know that if I dig through 11 levy, it's still going to generate a Saga dice at the end of it, too. And so I have found that one of my favorite when we see how my favorite list stacks up later on, I've enjoyed taking what would normally be my dice battery in the back, which would in this case maybe be like a 6-man levy. And then I put maybe 1 or 2 more levy from the other squads to make it an 8-man levy. And now I have an 8-man levy that is a Saga dice, generates 2 Saga dice, is probably way behind my main stuff, and hangs out around my warlord. So he has 8 bodies to pull from if the tough gets going. And a lot of times you don't want to maybe have an entire levy squad that's focused more on following than shooting. But these guys have been nice to make a really good backfield unit early in the game. And it is something that I feel like you want to play that turn 1, because like you're saying, the dividends start to pay out. If you get an extra Saga dice every turn, it's going to be 6 more Saga dice for your game if you keep that unit around. So,
yeah. And like we said, there's no activation pool, so
that is the only other way
pretty much, right? Yeah, the only way to get yourself some additional Saga dice. And like you say, this is probably one of the ones, you know, the other ones you kind of want as big a unit as possible. Where this one, you know, bigger unit would be nice, but it's not critical for what you're trying to pull off here.
Right. So I'm usually hitting that first turn if I can.
All right. Well, if you're rolling more than 4 more Saga dice, there's going to be 2 different ones in there. Well, I guess, yeah, you can roll all the same. But all right, moving on. First juicy triple here, baby. 1 of each bear totem. It's got to be good, totem. Right? While this totem is active, the unit increases its armor by 1 against both melee and shooting attacks. So we're thinking javelin warriors, or I guess it could be levy, going from 3/3 to 4/4 is pretty good. or 3/4 to 4/5. And it gains resilience too. Oh my gosh. However, its move and charge distances become S. So quite a bit tougher, but quite a bit slower. Those S sticks just don't.
No,
you get 2 or 3 of them, they just don't go as far as what you think they should.
They really don't. Bear Totem, though, I think is one of the reasons Skrælings stayed banned at the beginning, and it was maybe an overreaction, but they released the Skræling board almost at the same time as they released Vikings and Crusades, so it was fresh. Nothing really had Resilience 2. We thought Resilience 2? Are you insane? Like, nothing has Resilience 2. That's absolutely outrageous. And so we just presumed right off the bat a unit that was going to have Resilience 2 all game was going to be one that was just game broken. You just couldn't get anything done with that. So I've had a hard time trying to decide what I want to do with my Bear Totem because it's a 3 dice ability. You're going to have a common and an uncommon and a rare. There's no way about avoiding that. And if you don't roll that combo organically, you're going to have to spend another dice. So this basically is a 4 dice ability if you need it on first turn. You know, and so, and like I said, you've given almost all of your dice economy to it, and now you're gifted with a super slow unit. This board kind of promotes wanting to be agile and moving up for certain plays, staying together in groups. I still think Bear Totem's getting played every single game with the Skrælings for the most part. But what I started to do as I played them is initially I wanted it on that big warrior unit that was going to see contact. But I had a hard time getting that big warrior unit in there. And I found that my opponent just flat ignored that unit as much as they could. They just tried to get away from those guys. And so I learned that a levy squad that had the Bear Totem on it, a bow levy squad, suddenly was this huge mass. You could put a good shooting unit in a certain position on the field, and no one wants to go tangle with Resilience 2.
No,
It's not about not being able to hit them. It's just that in a game like Saga, you can't generate enough attack dice to get rid of that thing in one go. And so I found that the Bear Levy unit ended up being a really good anchor unit for my army. It gets in one position and pretty much stays there pretty much. Or if it needs to block something off, or in objective games, obviously, this is where it's huge. If you're going to play Sacred Ground and the Levy are going to get into one of the, you have a, 12 Levy in heavy cover or something like that with Resilience 2, you're not moving those guys pretty much all game. So.
The toughest Levies in the game right there,
Well, again, the Flemish really showing them up then right off the bat.
Yeah.
The chivalry guys kind of taking these guys down a little bit. But yeah, to have that every turn. I think one of the other considerations that people end up doing is your Warlord. Your Warlord already has Resilience, but he's armor 4/4. And in a way, you want that armor 5/5 Warlord. And having an armor 5/5 Warlord who has determination for himself every turn to get rid of some of this fatigue, I think it shows up on him often. And as we're going to see later on, the Skrælings do have 1 or 2 clever tricks for getting rid of fatigue. So the biggest problem that plagues Resilience units is that they don't often, they get clogged up after their first contact in the turn pretty much, and they have so much fatigue, they might not have lost anybody, but they can't get anything going after that. There's a couple ways of getting around that in your opponent's turn for the Skrælings, we'll see. But the Warlord by himself then has that determination to try to get rid of it, but you're still stuck with a slow Warlord pretty much. And if I'm going to take 3, potentially 4 Saga dice to turn my Warlord into the Bear Warlord, I want him on the front lines, basically. I don't want to have to have spent almost all my dice for a Warlord that my opponent is terrified to even engage all game. But in some of these Adepticon-style packets, having a Warlord, that's arguably the toughest Warlord that anyone is going to go up against in Age of Vikings and Invasions, I think. He's going to be a Resilience 2 Warlord all the time that potentially has a Puma squad behind him with 8 to 12 bodyguard. That's really, really cool. But to get there, it's a 5 or 6 Saga dice investment before you've even moved an inch. So...
Okay. Well, yeah, I think that makes sense. Wait a couple turns. You got some other totems you might pop instead, but move up while you can when you got your full move, and then once the battle, is kind of, where it's going to be decided, or the units are quite close together, then pop it. So you can just pop it and go into the attack on your own turn right away, if the distances are right. But just wait a bit and see where the fight's going to happen, and then you can use it most appropriately, it sounds like.
What's hard though, what gives you a bit of a panic, and Bear is something we're spending the most time on, almost just because it's the board. You focus on it a lot. Mm-hmm. So I'm rereading, trying to figure out which other ability it is on here too. One of the things that's hard is that right off the bat, your whole army is armor 3/3, well 3/4 for your javelin guys. It can't close ranks. It doesn't necessarily thrive in terrain or anything like that, and it can sometimes be hard to activate. So if you're playing an opponent that's aware of that, they're coming for your Saga dice on turn 1 pretty much, because they know how hard it is when this warband starts to lose Saga dice. And so perhaps you did move into your square position and you're hoping to hit Bear on your turn 2, but you didn't anticipate already being down 2 Saga dice, because the most defensive thing you can do to preserve your Saga dice on this board is Bear and one of the other totems that shows up later on in here too. So sheer number of models, Bear, and Elk that we'll talk about, that's it. If they want to come for you hard on the first turn, you better have a smart play with your terrain set up a little bit, I think. That's so Bear otherwise is what you're clinging to. So
okay. Yeah, there's going to be a question about, this is a shooting, skirmishy type faction. How much does it rely on terrain? And, if you got a couple units in terrain and one of them out, this would be a good use for that exposed one. So all right.
Kind of segues actually into Beaver Totem.
Beaver Totem, yeah. So another
the Beaver Totem. Not always the mightiest one that you think of. And I think it's funny because this is the most aggressive of the totems on there. We're looking at Pumas and Bears. The Beaver is the one that while this totem is active,
watch out. Yeah.
The unit can re-roll all its attack dice during melee and does not reduce its movement or charge distances in uneven terrain. Right. This is the other 3 dice combo for the totem on here. So one that's taken 3, potentially 4. And Beaver is maybe my least used totem. And, maybe that's kind of a big surprise for me as I think about it, because when I see a Saga board that gets to reroll its attack dice, I'm all over it. Mm-hmm. I love my attack dice. I fancy myself just as unlucky as the next guy, and so I'm always happy to make up for that chance when I'm charging or something like that. But again, 3 or 4 Saga dice to get this thing going, and I'm going to have to try to decide, when do I want to get this going? Do I need to get Bear up right off the bat? Do I need to get Puma up right off the bat to get things going? And do I want to move this turn, or am I content being 100% stationary on my first turn? And, that's kind of worrisome to be 100% stationary unless you are an army that just puts out volumes of fire and you're going to make up for it later. But I don't know that's the Skrælings. So opportunistically later on in the game, I think Beaver, you could change your tone and say that the best defense is a good offense, and that I'm going to put Beaver Totem up rather than Bear because no one wants to charge my 12-man warriors that's re-rolling its attack dice just the same. The reality is that a lot of first or second turn hard chargers in Saga anticipate some type of resistance that's equivalent to re-rolled attack dice. And so it's not so dang scary, and you might lose your little armor 3 re-roll attack dice unit in one go from 6 or 7 Goth warriors or something like that on a ferocious day or something. You just had to put half of your Saga dice generation into that unit to get it going. So it's obvious that it's good to get re-rollable attacks. It's obvious that it's good to fly through terrain. You could build your game plan around, I'm making a 12-man unit. I got Beaver Totem on it. The rest of my army's only goal is to keep them 100% safe so that turn 3 or 4, I can spam all my easy to activate warriors to get them way the heck up for my mighty slingshot charge up there, and try to rely on some of these activation reactions later on to just endure. That's the thought with all Skraeling plays, I think, is how do I take my super totem unit and toss it into the fight and get the most of it. But it takes you 2-3 turns to really power up that totem unit in the first place and to defend yourself. I've also been worried on the advance. I've been blessed that most of the games that I played so far as Skrælings have had a lot of aggressive opponents because they see my armor 3 status. But I would be really worried to try to press into heavy cover of a sitting army a lot of times too with these guys, unless I was using maybe Beaver Totem. So I think I would maybe have used it more often if I knew I was having to uproot 2 or 3 Carolingian bow squads in ruins or something like that.
Sure. Okay, interesting. Yeah, 3 dice. This is where you're getting your attack power. Works on defense and offense, and that you don't have to be the attacker to get those rerolls in. But
and it's not like you're closing ranks, so you're still going to get your full combo of that all the time. One of the other things I noticed, though, too, is that a lot of your surgical strikes, you're going to be a javelin-armed guy. So you're wanting to get +1 a lot of times. And if you've set up that cool attack that you were really wanting, a lot of times you don't really need that reroll. That reroll is going to get you like 2 or 3 extra hits, and sometimes that's crucial if it's your warlord or something like that. But when you're being a little more surgical with it, I think, or maybe you're fighting a lot of hard targets or something like that, but I think you still have other answers than just smash into it with Beaver Totem.
Sure. All right. Well, let's look at Elk Totem. I think this is the last one, right?
Yep, the final one, and arguably my favorite, I think. So
okay. Instead of re-rolling attack dice, when you got the Elk Totem active, you can re-roll defense dice, and you can close ranks here. Monty's dream totem here. He's probably hanging above his pillow at home.
A man of the elk.
Oh, cool. So, yeah.
Now, this is it. This, I think, is the best defensive totem in there. Closing ranks with rerolls on your defense dice is super good. And you're still rerolling your defense dice when you're making these big charges and stuff like that. So honestly, if I'm looking to play an economical game and I want to get up and get moving, I play Puma and I play Elk on my first turn. And I try to ask myself, can I focus most of my game now just through playing raw Saga, of knowing that I am using this big Elk unit to fill the role of what maybe Hearthguard would have been for me or something like that.
Sure.
And just saying I've got a bunch of small javelin packs, a couple bow guys, and one really tough unit. That starts to bring it back into the natural line of thinking for most Saga armies. Elk is the one, I think, because you're not slow like Bear too, so you can decide to switch tempo halfway through the game and be on the offense with Elk. Put yourself into a position. Maybe this is where Saga 2.2 javelins would have been better, because I would have loved to move up into range, shoot again if I could, and then ask them to charge me each turn.
Yeah.
So I would never launch a charge with these guys, but I'm just generating a high volume of javelin shots. They just can't ignore. They have to charge at a certain point. And as we switch over here to these next reactions, they have the ability to move up, shoot a couple times, and end with fatigue and remove that fatigue before the opponent can do anything about it. So these are the totems. We'll see later on too that one of these abilities requires that you have a totem so that you can benefit from it. And that is where I've used Eagle Totem sometimes, where it doesn't matter, is that I've put Eagle Totem on units just so that they technically have a totem, so that I can use the ability that I think we'll segue into now, which is Sacred Bonds. So Sacred Bonds is the first of the non-totem ability for the Skrælings. It is the ability that can get used with any dice. It's just one of any dice. It's an orders reaction, and it's straightforward. Remove a fatigue from one of your units benefiting from a totem. So now we can see how I'm talking about. I like these plays sometimes with Elk, or maybe even Bear, where we activate, we get in their face, we launch a couple javelin shots so that we're exhausted, or not exhausted, but have some fatigue. And then we're able to remove that fatigue before the opponent can charge us. And now we get to take advantage of our hardy, big Elk benefits and stuff. So
that's a good one. Yeah, any board would Love to have any die. Yeah, this is.
Any
you can
die.
imagine a common, uncommon, and a rare. Pictured on any board. You move fatigue one of your units.
Visualizing
it. Heck yeah. Let's do it. So that's cool. All right. Let's move down to tribal tactics activation using 2 of the same dice. Activate a unit to make a shooting attack, which generates no fatigue. Pretty good. After this shooting attack is resolved, activate this unit to make a movement, which generates no fatigue here. So I'm like, yeah, this is good. Fatigue-free shoot, fatigue-free move.
It's really the bread and butter of the ability. What does this board do on the table actually, other than these totems? It does tribal tactics. Tribal tactics, the thing that you would maybe anticipate seeing every turn that you're kind of trying to build a lot of your action around. There's no big shooting attacks on this board, no big super melee things other than what's built into your totems. So you're going to have to get it through raw Saga. And this is where, as we've talked about these javelin changes, you can see how the previous edition would have been huge for this one, because now you must select. I either activate my unit to shoot using Saga abilities or a dice, and then I can shoot as many times as I want, or I get to take the free fatigue-free shooting, and it happens once a turn, and I can't shoot any more with it. With the old Skraelings, you could move up, shoot with your free shot, then you could hit tribal tactics, and shoot again for free, move again, and then launch one more shot using a dice afterwards. And through that whole system, you only end up with 1 fatigue. And it only cost you, and it cost 1 less dice to get that chain going. You can still kind of pull this off, but this is where the addition creep has hurt them a little bit. You can still do basically the same tactic, but it's going to cost you 1 or 2 more Saga dice and potentially 1 more fatigue.
On the front end there, yeah.
Man, and then on a board where you're trying to decide, I wanted to hit my bear totem on turn 3 once I got into position, but I actually need to be focusing on the only offense I can generate through tribal tactics. And it's going to take me tribal tactics, sacred bonds, and probably 1 activation to be able to get any meaningful play out of one of these units other than just a shoot.
Sure, yeah.
Now, you can, though, use it to take, what I've liked, though, is to take that big, what's worth noting is that this is the same cost as activating a levy unit. So anytime you could activate a levy unit on its own, you could also just do tribal tactics.
As well, yeah. Let's.
So I was talking about the bear levy squad. Then we got 11 guys with bows that have the bear totem, and I can shoot and then just creep them up a little bit more, and shoot and just creep them up a little bit more. And this is nice on a game where you've been able to get the type of terrain you were really hoping for. And so maybe you've been able to create certain bottlenecks that the bear squad can move out and take advantage of. Likewise, this is a great way for the bear squad to shoot and creep on games where we have a center objective, like Tale of not Tale of Challenges, Old Feud or something like that, where we have something
on the hill.
In the middle.
Yeah.
Because the entire time you're hoping that you're doing the scoot and shoot with the bear levy squad. Meanwhile, the elk warrior unit or the beaver warrior unit or whatever your big warrior unit is more free to focus on something else. They don't want to spend any time on that levy unit most of the time, so that gives you open access to do whatever you want with that levy unit. Just don't charge it into things for no reason. And a lot of times you're just moving this constant area of denial unit out there a little bit. And at the end of the day, it's still shooting 6 times as a regular levy squad. So you could always give it your we obey that turn, shoot it again, and creep out. So levy, I think, almost take more advantage from it.
Okay.
Well, actually, I don't know, because the mainstay ability is being able to use tribal tactics, and we'll link it to ancestors here later on. So
okay. Well, I guess bottom line, very flexible ability, very good ability, and wherever you need it, if it's the levy are best situated this turn to take advantage, don't feel like you shouldn't do that. If the warriors are in the spot, pop it with the warriors.
It's a great way, like I said, to move up to your shooting position and then just press even forward pretty much. You're reaching your hand in their pocket a little bit with it. You can move in between units or a little bit more. You're really getting 12 inches of movement outside of this pretty much. So with a regular levy squad, regular warrior squad. So, and you're not getting a fatigue from it. So,
all right. Well, next one down, another triple here. Possession. Yeah. Why don't you tell us about it?
Possession possesses your mind while you're playing this with the Skrælings, because you always ask yourself, is this the time that I'm supposed to use it? The other of the 3 dice abilities. And what it is an orders or orders reaction where you choose one of your units benefiting from a totem. This unit gains all the bonuses of another totem of your choice until the end of the turn.
Double
they go ahead and they mention here in the Ragnar section that does mean they can select another totem that's currently being used by another unit, because they're not actually.
You could have two elk totems, yeah.
I feel like there's kind of a language contradiction inside of here. So, but it appears that you can use it at the same time. You could potentially have 2 bears, or something like that. But goodness golly, it takes a lot of Saga dice.
It's 3. Yeah, I mean, you could just give a unit a totem for the rest of the game, any one of them, or for one turn, double it up. So has to be a very specific purpose in mind, or a specific play, or it's all going to ride on something that you've identified, and this is what you're going to spend your dice on. But do you get to pop it that often?
No, I almost never touch it, honestly, because I feel so strangulated for dice trying to get my tribal tactics plays and other things going later on in the game. I can think of the scenario where I would want it, right? Maybe it's an objective game and we just get to make another bear unit at the right moment, right time later on. Mm-hmm. But this requires that we have a rare, right? And if we don't have a rare, we've had to spend another dice. So 4 Saga dice potentially to put resilience 2 on a unit that your opponent might say, you know what, I'm going to skip that unit this turn. Good job using all your dice on this. You did half my battle for me. Because my job as your opponent is to make you spend dice where you don't need to spend dice. And I want to be doing Beaver or Bear with it all the time, because if I'm going to spend that many dice, I really want to make it work. It needs to be worth it. And I'm not going to be able to find a tricky way to use it as Puma to get a dice back. Like, not that you would anyway, you're spending 3 Saga dice and stuff. You could put you could spend 3 dice on yourself to give yourself a totem so that you could spend 1 more dice with Sacred Bonds and take a single fatigue off yourself. I mean, these plays exist if you want to show what inefficiency looks like a little bit. They're in there. But so, I mean, it's a right ability at the right time type of thing. There's going to be this moment for a lot of Skraeling players where maybe it just lands and maybe it's perfect. And don't look past it. But for my money, heck, that's going to be 2, 3, maybe, 2 or 3 more activations or something that turn is what I want more often than not,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, pretty big price there. I think you're rolling 5 Saga dice. You spent 3 on this one thing on like turn 4 or something. So it really has to be pretty clutch. Your opponent has no choice. To win the game, they have to do this, and you just happen to roll all the right dice, and you plop down the bear or the elk at the right time. So, all right. Moving on to agility. This is a melee or shooting reaction. Use any sort of die you're feeling like. If your unit's armor is lower than the enemy unit's armor, you cancel casualties equal to the difference between the enemy unit's armor and your own unit's armor. So, if your armor 3 on mostly everything, attacked by warriors, pretty common occurrence. You'll cancel a casualty, and I think just having this up will make them a little scared, or I don't know, scared's the right term, but reluctant to reduce your armor. I'm sure there's a mathematical equation in there where it's time to do it and time you wouldn't, but if they take you down to a 2, your warriors are going to cancel 2 casualties. So if you are kind of hanging out there with some fatigues or something, maybe having this one is good.
Something I thought was strange was that it's a shooting reaction, right? As most shooters are going to be armor 3, right? Are we comparing the armor of the shooter to the armor of the guy there, which I think is what it would be? And so it would only be some of these scenarios where maybe you've used the Saga ability to, maybe Normans or something like that, drop their armor with fatigue, or is that even what they do? I don't think it is, but yeah, a lot of times just at a flat defense,
I can't.
bow unit versus your unit, you can't even use this ability. So because of that, I kind of badmouthed it at the beginning, but saving one model for one dice is actually good economy, because
it just
if
works.
this gave you two defense dice, yeah, and you can find some plays in there to really stack up fatigue up and down and make yourself armor 5 on 2, and that's the biggest scenario basically. I've never been able to get the armor 6 on 2, but I've got the armor 5 on 2 to cancel 3, and that was pretty nice.
Yeah, I mean, most every faction has a warlord, melee armor 5, so you can see plowing your javelin boys into their warlord or something, canceling 3 casualties outright is pretty tasty. So yeah, not bad at all. All right, now I think is this the last one then?
This is the last ability, and this is one that I have. You can tell how good it could be. So it's Ancestors. It's 2 dice of different dice facing, so gray and black on there. It's an activation reaction, and it says, trigger this ability after the resolution of an enemy activation. Remove a fatigue from one of your units, then activate it to move or charge. Heck, we like that, really.
Yeah, that's good, baby.
But getting tangled up with the restriction of needing to have a fatigue on there to remove it so that you can use the next part of it.
Okay, it's conditional.
Right. The language change would open the door for this a bunch, because sometimes I put myself in the position where I do that play I was talking about with the warrior squad, right? Yeah, because the whole combo is we move up, we hit tribal tactics, we shoot, we move up again, we use a dice to shoot. Maybe we do another shoot if we have the dice in there. Then so we're giving it on their turn. You have 2 fatigues on. You hit Sacred Bonds and knock yourself down to 1. And then you hope that you're going to be able to hit Ancestors if they mess up and get rid of that last fatigue, and then potentially charge them on top of it too. That's what I like also, is being able to get the elk unit into position, wrest some fatigue off from them, and then potentially charge the opponent in their turn. Now, this is something that's triggered after the resolution of the enemy action, so it's not going to stop you from getting countercharged or something else like that. But it's really common then. What I really like then too, so you get charged, and I actually have I think I still have a rules question on this, actually, a timing question, right? So if you charge me and I play Ancestors, am I going to remove the fatigue would I trigger Ancestors at the end of the fight, or after you've made contact with my models? Because if it's after the fight, right, we would have a fight, I would get a fatigue from it, and then I would trigger Ancestors because we just resolved an enemy activation. I would get rid of that fatigue, and then I would charge, which is the way that most of my opponents have agreed that they think it should be played. And so we have been playing it that way.
I think that is how it works.
Okay, good. So that's...
Once you say what the alternate interpretation would be.
Right. Then it doesn't make as much sense. So I would say the Ancestors is maybe then my favorite bread and butter board ability then, because you spend a lot of work with tribal tactics to get into place, but Ancestors is going to be maybe the opportunity that launches more of your winning charges, because I love charging in the opponent's turn, and a lot of good Saga players do, especially if it's after they've gotten to do their charge, because usually they've thrown their whole basket at you in that charge, and now they've usually got a pretty empty board that you get to go up against. Or if they only have 1 or 2 defensive abilities, you potentially get them to clear them while it's still their turn, and now it's your turn and they have an empty board. So Ancestors is great for that. Ancestors most likely is going to see its most play then responding after that charge. Or if you put yourself in a position where you know that they need to double activate to charge you, and that's not too hard to do, because at the end of the day, you're an armor 3 squad with 1 or 2 fatigue on there. God, that's one of the juiciest targets in Saga.
Yeah.
You see that, you want to go get them. So it's kind of easy to bait them out there, but your opponent's thinking and they say, God, it's that elk squad, though. I don't even know if I want to do it. And so they're hunting for worse decisions in your army. And since we've kind of gone through the abilities a little bit, I think that is the theme of trying to do well with this warband so far. It's been a big struggle for me to try to think about what the best army list is. And I've really banged my head trying to figure out what's best for these guys. You know, if we just did the most plain Jane thing ever and did like 4 units of regular warriors, 2 units of bows or something like that, and they're regular size squads or something, what happens is that it's really easy then for your opponent to avoid the totem squads that you've selected and focus on the squads that don't have the totems.
Pick on the other ones. Yeah.
And so you have to try to find this way to generate most of your game into ramming totem units down their throat and making it so that they can't choose your non-totem options pretty much, which makes it really hard then to make a list then that is just very even. A lot of times I like redundancy in my lists when I play a game. If something's good, I want there to be twice. But with the Skrælings, you're only having one of each of these totems, and you need to be really careful about how and when you get them wrapped up into it. Because you can't get rid of those totems later on and put it on another unit, you might have had your elk unit get messed up in the first turn, and now the rest of the game, you've got a 3-man elk unit that you're not using, and you say, great, like my entire plan is gone. And because rerolling defense dice on closed ranks is good, but is it good enough to stop the meanest Age of Vikings combo that's coming at you or something like that? Is it good compared to the volume of bodies and Anglo-Saxon players putting up against you? And like, so it's almost as if this board was actually built to just square off with the Vikings, kind of. They do well.
Yeah, I think it's
Vikings is fun.
Yeah, I think it's a good match, actually.
But as soon as you make them start what I found in my plays with this leading up for the tournaments is the Age of Invasions factions seem to do really well against these guys. They do really well against them. You know, Saxons in particular, pretty much. The whole army is armor 3. You're never having
boys.
the key plays in there to raise and get your armor up. Even naked Saxon squads into these little armor 3 units when they're not ready for it sucks. And God forbid the Huns, right? These guys have a really hard. It's because I couldn't come up with a good enough strategy against the Huns is one of the reasons they're still on the bench. I'm still putting them on the maybe for Adepticon just because of the novelty of this a little bit. Yeah. No one has gotten to take these guys, so you want to bring it in there. But I know that I'm going to really struggle to go get opponents' warlords. I'm really going to struggle at, a lot of different of the secondary objectives that the game represents a lot of times. Some of these Adepticon scenarios are not nice to levy, if I recall. And shooting is maybe not as penalized as it was, but at least on one of the scenarios is penalized also. So you say like, gosh, Skrælings, we have a really hard time getting a lot of our action done because there's no mega combo I'm going to throw in the middle of the fight. But back to army lists a little bit. What I ended up liking the most, I think, ended up being 2.5 points levy, 3.5 points warriors. And I already talked about my little Puma squad that sits in the back. So I would do, 12 bows, and 6 bows in the back. And then I'd pull one off of both the 12 bow squads and put them on there to flesh out that Puma squad just a little bit more. And so then the bow squads are still shooting normal. They're still shooting 6. And one of those squads is usually going to be the one that gets bear put onto it. The other squad usually is going to try to find itself in hard cover. So both of my bow shooting units, one's in hard cover, one's got bear. And you say like, God dang it, I don't want to even fight this unit pretty much, So in a way, it makes it so the levy are pretty well left alone during the game. Then I try to have one big warrior unit, sometimes a 12-man warrior unit, to turn into my elk squad. And a lot of the game then is getting run through those guys. The rest of the dudes that are in the back then are there for opportunistic javelin shots and for Saga dice generation pretty much. because that's the other thing. You really want as many dang Saga dice as you can with this board, because they want Saga dice more than almost any Saga board really does. Their mainstay abilities are all taking 2 Saga dice to do. They don't have a mass activate. I mean, you kind of have the Vinland thing up there to activate 2 units, but most of the time you say, do I want to play Ancestors or do I want to play Vinland? And activate 2 units, and you say, dang it, I really wanted to set up my Ancestors play. That big combo I talked about where we move, we hit tribal, we shoot again, we do Sacred Bonds, and we hit Ancestors, that generates ultimately, 12 to 18 shots, depending on how you're doing it, spread across your turn and your opponent's turn. You end up ditching most of the fatigue, but that's a 7 dice play to get that thing going.
Yeah.
It takes 7 dice to roll through a couple rounds of javelin shots, re-rolling your defense dice, and a charge in your opponent's turn. That's the core of the Skrælings gameplay to me, was trying to find a way to rehash that every time, and then otherwise use the same opportunistic levy shooting and objective plays that I would do with any other Saga warband pretty much in there. But to actually get things going with their board, it's that tribal tactics all the time to try to get myself and trick my opponent into thinking that I'm overextended. The reality is I'm in super deep water out there pretending that I'm tough and pretending that I want them to come and get me. The reality is I hope that I just skate through this a little bit and then get something done on their turn. But warlords laugh at this board. They alone can go take down the non-totem units most of the time without ease and stuff like that. So if you are using terrain to supplement yourself, you then come across the problem that I talked about at the start of the game, which is you are a very static warband. Then you're not getting up and moving, and your opponent is dictating all the wheres and whys of the combats and stuff like that. And that can be kind of scary. At the same time, I think about, am I just always looking at it wrong? What if we don't need any totems? Like, what if we only need 1 totem or something like that?
Rogue
and I'm just playing raw Saga that's built around tribal, ancestors, and bonds over and over again. Just knowing that I know how to play javelin and bow guys. Do I just raw Saga away on that?
Saga,
I mean, I don't. You're going to still be fighting uphill a little bit, but I think you definitely can. Maybe your whole play is trying to get 1 big eagle, like +1 shot or something to turn in there, and maybe overactivate it till it's exhausted, then Sacred Bonds, and then Ancestors to get it down to 1 fatigue, rest it on your turn, finish the whole cycle again. I mean, that's kind of boring play a little bit. You may be dropping 18 shots out at 12 inches, but that's your entire board. And that's it. So,
all right. Well, do you have fun playing these?
It has been, but it's been intimidating. It's really been intimidating. I thought I was gonna enter in with my first couple games and really pull some tricks on my opponent, and they're gonna say resilience 2. And then I said, like, dang, my resilience 2 guy is stuck in the mud. Like I said, something I ended up doing too sometimes is I would put Eagle Totem on my warlord. Even though he doesn't have a ranged weapon, just so he could take advantage of Sacred Bonds. And that becomes a lot bigger deal in the last half of the game.
Interesting.
Because Warlord is your toughest fighting unit other than your big warrior squad, pretty much. And so you want to get him involved, or you're going to force him to get involved. And having him have a totem is a great way to keep him alive on your opponent's turn and just keeping 1 bonds parked there all the time to try to free yourself up from. So I think there's a multitude of plays in Skrælings that I just haven't seen yet, and I encourage other people to give it a go.
Okay,
it might be a harder pick for your tournament scene if you're coming hot and heavy, but if you have no time limit on your game and you're going to get to play 6 whole rounds or something like that, I bet Skrælings are way more fun because you're not under a huge time pressure to get things going. You're going to, in some of these tournaments, not get your turns 5 even sometimes if things have gone slow. And if you're having this mental static from trying to figure out, wait, what dice do I need for this? You might be slow at playing your Skrælings too a little bit. So slow in your brain, slow on the table. But occasionally the elk unit will survive like 3 charges in a row, and you'll say, all right, I love the
Here we go,
Skraeling.
baby. That's cool. Have you played Skraelings on Skrælings?
No, I have not. I think that'd be pretty interesting. So
that'd be pretty wild, yeah.
Models wise, talking about models.
Yeah, what are you using?
I think I have selected, here I just led this by saying, like, here's a really historic, accurate approach of like all the people that these actually are. Well, I've selected like all woodland Indians that are not actually Skrælings.
Yeah.
I think if you wanted to make really accurate, like Thule people or something, you should be looking at some of these like Inuit packs that are out there, and even some of these like Neanderthal packs that I had seen, just because they had a lot of different bone type things on there. And what was really cool about the Thule people is that they were like the most prolific whale hunters of the time period. They're going around in skin canoes pretty much. They're not really canoes, but they're hunting bowhead whales all the time, and they would have armor, actual armor. As far as I know, the only armor in North America in this time period for several hundred years is made by the Thule people, and they attach like bone segments together and make bone armor. And I thought, like, that's like a necromancer's armor in fantasy or something. And I haven't been able to see an actual picture of what it looks like, because the Thule people are interesting because they're on the East Coast where the Vikings are at, but they're also in Alaska. So, I mean, they go the entire northern scope there. And that armor find was like in the 40s, and I'm still looking for pictures of it a little bit. But that gives some cool modeling potential.
That's cool, yeah.
I also, though, really loved Valhalla Rising, which was not a popular movie. A lot of people really did not like Valhalla Rising. That had Mads Mikkelsen in it. And they go to North America in it. Yeah. And I think people didn't like it because it's more of an art house movie, kind of. It's like a transcendental thought and like man's battle against, all this other stuff. But the Skrælings in that have kind of a proto-Algonquin vibe that I think is so cool. And I really wanted to emulate that, where it's just kind of a red ochre paint. And so I looked at Wargames Atlantic's Woodland Indians that are their 3D printed kit. And there's a couple, post-Columbian type artifacts on there I just tried not to have, some metal hatchets and tomahawks and stuff. But otherwise, they have the cool kind of skull shape of the people I think of, and I think they should have some fun painting jobs. I also maybe wanted to lean into the fantasy theme kind of hard with these guys too a little bit, and do the if you guys have seen Bone Tomahawk. Bone Tomahawk is a horror movie about a group of fantasy indigenous like cannibals and stuff, and they wear like white powdered paint on them, and they're extremely cool. And I just thought it'd be a super cool army to do that too. But those Indians that Indian kit had done pretty well for me. I think there are a couple other like muskets and tomahawk-y line ones where you could cut out certain pieces and have some pre-contact native looking guys. But otherwise, like I said, if you're honestly trying to make the real Skræling people, you'd be looking at these kind of shorter, stockier Inuit type guys and stuff. And looking for that. That would be the most historically accurate. They would have been using like, which I think is neat, they would have been using some of the same spears that they were hunting whales with against the Vikings and stuff like that. So I think that's cool. But a lot of cool options. I think for modelers too, making like totems to set next to your units and stuff like that.
Right.
Cool.
Yeah. So as you trigger those abilities, and I think within the pack even, maybe there's little cutouts or something you can use. You got to have a way to, these are the Puma guys, these are the elk guys, and so you have a little totem next to them. It could be a little simple paper totem, cut out of paper, but having freaking elk or a dude with a giant elk.
Well, and I'd also
hat on,
I talked to you, I had thought about making a crossover for an Age of Magic army in this case too. So I wanted to do like North American and Native American mythological beasts inside of there and stuff too. Yeah. You could have that. But I also wanted to do North American dinosaurs in this case too. Because North America's got some of the coolest dinosaurs. So, you have like I don't know, Sioux Indians riding Tyrannosaurus Rex and stuff like that or whatever. So I almost wanted to make that up as the crossover, but I think I was a little over ambitious to get that done before Adepticon. So we'll see that on maybe an upcoming one, or maybe some of the New Age of Magic factions. Actually, who knows?
We'll see. We'll see. Yeah, we'll see. We'll see about that. Cool. Yeah. Well, Saga, is always. It's not history, it's inspired by history.
Right on.
It's not the historical battle, it's the battle as told by the grandpa 50 years after it happened to his grandkids, talking about the Skraeling foes that he faced. So, doing a little more fantastical element to him. I think it's in Saga. I think it's fine. Yeah.
I think the Indians, the Northern Woodland Indians, it looks like they're using. I'm looking at their pack that Gripping Beast used. They have some Skrælings on there. They're honestly perfectly good. They look a little out of proportion and kind of old compared to stuff. But actually, as I'm looking at their lead guy, he's got bone armor on the front here, too. He looks appropriately intimidating and powerful. So maybe armor 4 appropriately.
Sounds good. Well, I think that'll do it for today. If somebody has played with or against the Skrælings, let us know. There's definitely a little overdue getting this out. I guess it's been around the whole time, but finally using them at Adepticon here was the main motivation. So at least people can hopefully, listen to this video and, just kind of understand what they're going to be up against if they do run into it at Adepticon. I do want to thank Sean, Patrick, Mitchell, Scott, Frank, Britt, DJ, Robin, rest of the Saga Thursday patrons. Quite a few of those KC guys are patrons. Thank you on their behalf, Stephen. And I wouldn't be doing all these additional videos in 2025 without the patrons. So that is going to do it for this one. Thanks again for coming on, Stephen, volunteering to do this. Really appreciate it. And Adepticon is coming up as we're recording this. This will come out before Adepticon, but probably another month after we've recorded this. But
new venue, home field advantage for you.
Yeah, getting pretty close there. We'll see how it goes. Some trepidation there, but it should be a good time. And looking forward to it and catching up with all the buds. So that is going to be it for this one. We'll do it again sometime. See you later.
All right, take care.
Bye. Saga! If you'd like to see more Saga content, consider joining the Heathen Army over on Patreon or popping on down to the Saga Thursday Discord server. Links below. Thanks, guys.